Hi, my name is Ryan Brenner. I am on the Peace and Security Committee for the United Nations Association National Capital Area chapter. Our chapter, in partnership with the Carter School, was thrilled to put together this panel on harnessing technology for peace building. We gathered four up and coming startup entrepreneurs who have used technology in innovative and different ways to approach conflict resolution, peace building, IQ, and a number of social cohesion issues. They will speak for themselves here in a moment. I started the recording before I started the recording a little bit late, so they didn't get a chance. We didn't get a chance to have the proper introduction from GMU. However, I wanted to provide a short little video here welcoming. We have Shawn Guttman, co-founder and CEO of Project Didi, Boaz Becker, CEO of HeadOn, Ola Mohajer, founder and CEO of Transcend, and Sarah June Benjamin, founder and CEO of PeaceIQ. We were thrilled to be in partnership with Dr. Alpo Ozurdem, Dean and Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies from the Carter School. So thank you so much to the Carter School for putting this panel together with us, and I hope that its enduring legacy on YouTube is that it educates and gets people curious about how we can use peace building, how we can use technology in peace building in really different ways than we ever thought. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shawn.
So my background is in education and grassroots peace building. For the last 20 years, I've been dedicating my life to the question of how do I help make peace between Israel and Palestinians, including moving to Israel in 2010, because you can't make peace from afar, even in this hybrid virtual world. And the first decade that I had in Israel was within that idea of true peace comes through educational encounters. And one of the things that my colleagues would say, that I would say, is sure, you can measure our impact on participants, on the people who we directly connect with, but the ripple effect of how we do, what we do, all of this, it's immeasurable, it's intangible, but we know how to point to a big success and say, yeah, that's because of all the great things we've been doing for the last 5 years, 10 years, and so on. And in the beginning, when I was doing that work, that was something that I often said, but after time, after 10 years of working in the in education in the Israeli Palestinian peace building world, I got frustrated with that. I was saying, okay, like peace building is about being pragmatic. It's about identifying the opportunities that are in front of you. It's about knowing what works, strengthening what does work, lowering what doesn't, and constantly playing around with this, constantly moving forward. And that's essentially what Didi is trying to solve, is trying to, say, can we measure that? Can we measure the ripple out effect? Can we measure how our actions move out from direct participants and shape the hearts and minds across society? When I was doing my master's in diplomacy and conflict studies, I started being exposed to all of these academic theories that blew my mind. They were wonderfully explaining why, especially within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, why the Oslo Accord succeeded, but then every agreement after that failed, or why we were able to, get the Camp David negotiations in 2000s off the ground, but they crumbled within 10 days, and I had this moment of being like, oh, wait, so these theories exist and they explain our reality perfectly, but we don't have peace. What's going on? What's missing? And then AI entered into the picture, and I was like, oh, wait a second. One of the reasons why why these theories don't work don't work in today's context is because they're all kind of stuck within that within the academic research paradigm. You know, it's all about how much I, as the researcher, how much data I can gather and process and understand and classify. And AI provided that that answer to the human bottleneck. So what we do at Didi is we start by scraping massive amounts of big data. We're looking for public discourse in general. So news media, social media, political discourse, anything from those fields, we're scraping and we're putting through our AI classifiers. Our first classifier is saying, okay, is this content related to the conflict that we're getting involved with? In this case, we're talking again about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the wars going on in the region for the last 2 years. And if it is connected, then the next thing that our classifiers are looking for are these tipping points and these parameters. So the first tipping point that and the first academic theory that we dived into is ripeness theory. It comes out of negotiation theory and perfect. Can you go forward a couple of one more? Yeah, here's good. So we're trying to identify ripeness theory. We're trying to say, okay, are conditions within, in this case again, the Israeli society, are conditions ripe for a negotiated solution to the conflict? So that's the first thing that we're doing. Based on the discourse analysis we're doing, is there a moment of ripeness today? The next level, again, is to say, okay, our clients, whether it's NGOs, companies, we're also trying to get into the whole SDG world and supporting those companies putting forward products and services to solve the SDGs. So the next level is, can we measure their impact in creating a moment of ripeness and creating those tipping points? And again, the third level is helping them to generate those tipping points, helping to generate that moment of ripeness by deploying an actuator that connects the right content to the right viewer at the right time and helps build that momentum. Ryan, can you go one more? I'll skip over that. Okay, so what does it look like? Here, this is what you're looking at is our data output from the first couple months of the war between Israel and Gaza. Starting on the left-hand side there, you can see the end of September 2023, going through October 7th, 2023, until the end of December. And what we're seeing when you look at that area of the ceasefire, we can see in the days leading up to it this growing public sentiment of a willingness to compromise. You know, saying, okay, the military, the confidence in winning militarily isn't the work with the army trying to rescue the hostages, trying to disarm Hamas, trying to end the war that way. That isn't succeeding in achieving our goals, and public sentiment shifts to, okay, let's compromise to at the very least have a ceasefire and get the hostages back. And that support, that public sentiment support, is essentially what gives the Prime Minister Netanyahu's government the ability to negotiate a ceasefire on the Israeli side of it and give up all these things that Israelis tend to hate. You know, having a ceasefire, B, giving humanitarian aid, C, releasing Palestinian security prisoners. Those are the no-nos, especially within Netanyahu supporters. But public sentiment gets us there and provides that ability to negotiate and ratify the ceasefire. So that was the first ceasefire, and we took that as our sort of as our roadmap to say, okay, can we see these trends replicate within our discourse analysis over the course of the 2 years of this war? Can you go by one more? Zooming ahead to a couple months ago, this is looking at the beginning of May 2025 until the end of June. And here we have two mini case studies that we're looking at. One is on the left-hand side. This is before the Iranian war started, and also before the ground war in Gaza restarted. We can see that same trend of the growth in the willingness to compromise line, that light blue line, that coincides with President Trump's successful negotiation and release of HeadOn Alexander, one of the Israeli-American hostages. And you can see that in those days leading up to the Gaza war restarting, that public sentiment around a willingness to compromise goes up and down relating to what is being talked about in public. So President Trump is very clearly pushing to end the war in Gaza, and news media, social media, all that is responding to this and saying, okay, let's grab on it. We hope that something can happen. And then the war starts, the ground war restarts again, that sentiment collapses and everything shifts back into that whole confident and willing militarily. And in this moment is what we call a missed opportunity. Public sentiment was there in order to push forward a resolution, to push forward a negotiation, but the political will wasn't there and it collapsed. The opposite happens in the Iranian war. We can see on the right-hand side where it kind of surprised everyone in both the beginning and the end. And you can see within the discourse analysis at the end of the war where that ceasefire happened, still the confidence in winning is the majority of what people are talking about, and the willingness to compromise isn't on the spectrum at all. And everyone and it just takes everyone by surprise. And here's this moment, this opportunity that was entirely political based. It was Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, let's start the war. It was Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, let's end the war. And public sentiment just wasn't in it at all. So again, I'll wrap up here and pass it on to my colleagues. What we're trying to do within all of this is to have as close to that minute by minute understanding of what's going on within public discourse, and to be able to feed that back into our clients to allow them to adapt, evolve, and pivot as quickly as everything is changing, and to be on the forefront of moving towards peace. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. And
Great. So now we're going to hear from Adam Becker, CEO of HeadOn, who's also doing work in this area.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so a key part in the feedback dynamics that lead to war is polarization. In other words, if you care about peace, you should probably be checking the temperature on polarization. And as you continue to check the temperature on polarization, one of the things that you notice is as polarization increases, as the temperature rises, you're going to see complete meltdown of democratic norms and institutions before leading to outright violence and then war. And so what exactly is this polarization? What is the mechanism by which it produces this effect? You can think about polarization as a type of feedback loop, where as polarization increases, in other words, as identities diverge and harden and crystallize into an us versus them, as that increases, the interaction between the groups starts to decrease. And as that decreases, polarization increases, and it's just a vicious cycle. So you can think about it by saying, well, how about we try to hack this? If we have this cycle, maybe we look at it the other way around. Maybe if you increase intergroup contact, perhaps you can reduce polarization, right? That would be a natural thing to think. And yes, over the last 70 years or so, there's been literally over 1,000 research papers saying this exact same thing. Yes, if you manage to bring people together into contact, you can reduce polarization. So that's nice. You can run this experiment. We run this in the West Bank all the time. You bring an 18-year-old Israeli to the West Bank and a 21-year-old Palestinian in the West Bank too. The Palestinian is driving a car heading towards a checkpoint staffed by this 18-year-old Israeli who's equipped with a gun, who's guarding that checkpoint, and they're going to come into contact. That's amazing, right? That's exactly what we want. It's going to reduce polarization, right? Obviously not. This is not how it works. So how do you make sense of this? And why is, I mean, first of all, none of these people want to be there. The Israelis, they don't want to be there. They don't want to see each other like this. The Israeli thinks the Palestinian might blow himself up. The Palestinian is scared of violence and humiliation perpetrated by the Israeli soldier. These are obviously not the optimal conditions for contact, right? So maybe all of these theorists or whatever, it's all academic, like theorizing. Maybe it's not. In the real world, we need fences. And good fences make good neighbors, right? That's the idea. You can see this in the animal kingdom too. I don't know if you've seen this thing. You put these two dogs, you give them a fence, and you put it between, and now they go berserk. That's what happens when you put the fence. So maybe sometimes fences is not the best idea, right? So when do good fences make good neighbors? And in some situations, in the West Bank, for example, we have the West Bank wall. Obviously, these are not the best neighbors at the moment, right? You can think about it like this. So if good fences don't always make good neighbors, again, what are the conditions by which it's true? When is it true that intergroup contact leads to a reduced polarization? In the 50s, the scientist Gordon Allport came up with a few different conditions by which contact can lead to reduced polarization, more specifically, reduced prejudice. He says, okay, if you have equal status, even not equal status in society, but equal status within the contact itself, and you have shared goals, an intergroup collaborative institution, if you do all of these different things, then you're likely to reduce your polarization. Nice. So you can think about this as kind of like a model. It's a function. You feed into it a bunch of variables, equal status, shared goals. What you get is the probability that prejudice is going to drop. All right, now maybe having all of these different conditions is going to be really difficult to do in the real world. Maybe you could do it in an experiment in a lab, but in the real world, it's tough to. Okay, so all these research scientists started saying, how about if we just have one? Let's just say we have equal status. What happens then? Or if we have two, what happens then? Then the function's a little bit simpler. Well, in those situations too, yes, probability the prejudice will drop will still, you could still see a decent chance the prejudice will drop. It's just not optimal. Okay, so you can think about these as facilitating conditions. Okay, fine. So these are facilitating. This is in the 50s. Since then, there's been a lot more work done. It's not just these four that are facilitating. It's many more. Now you have anxiety reduction techniques and indirect contact. Like there's more and more of these different things. And since then, even more still. And I suspect more are going to be happening. And then you realize that this is only to reduce the prejudice of the majority. That is, let's say you have a group in America of a bunch of white people and you bring in a black person and you ask the white people, are you lower in prejudice? Yes, they're lower. But what's happening to the emotions of the black person in the room too? Now you got to double it. You have even more variables once you include the minority experience. And as the world is becoming increasingly complex and we become even more divided, I think this is just going to become very difficult to handle. This is where deep contact learning comes in. The idea is to try to come up with a predictive function. You take all of these different variables, hundreds, thousands of variables, and try to map it on your probability space. There's so many different variables, you need a very complex function. This is where deep neural networks can come in. You need to take all these different things and plug them in to a neural network. At the end of it, you're going to get the probability that the prejudice will drop. This only works if you manage to have an AI that can give you that data. In other words, what I would like to impress on you is that each of these variables is a tiny knob, and you need to get an AI to go and mess around with that knob in order to produce the necessary data in order to see when it's going to work and not going to work. What I suggest is that we need to build AI systems that can adaptively learn optimal conditions of social contact in an increasingly dynamic world. Here's some suggestions for what a schematic of a system like this could look like. You bring in users, you attract them to some appealing social experience, and once they're there, the AI can start to mess around and dynamically create optimizable conditions for contact. Now, my company is called HeadOn. We call ourselves a campus for the world's most urgent conversations. I want to just show you what it could look like and how we're operationalizing these concepts. So we have different topics. We call these tracks. Each of these tracks could be 6 sessions, 8 sessions, whatever. You come once a week for an hour. Could be lots of different topics. Obviously, we have a lot of stuff in Israel, Palestine. Many Palestinians are creating tracks. But we also have, in 2 weeks, we're starting a track about how to get over a breakup when you're breaking up with an AI boyfriend, which apparently millions of people are already facing. And so everybody's coming in and we're having conversations about these topics. Okay, so women in the court, we have lots of different tracks. Anybody can start these tracks. Now, once people are in the tracks, now the AI can start to modify certain things. What can it modify? There's a bunch of different things. This is our homepage. So for example, it could choose to rank a particular conversation so that you can join that conversation, because it has a model that if you were to join that conversation, the probability of prejudice will go down, both for you and for the other. Perhaps there's conversations that if you come into, it's just going to be a disaster. Again, this is the Palestinian and the Israeli meeting. No. You don't want to just replicate checkpoints all over the place. That's what we've done already with Twitter and whatever. It's just more checkpoints. So the AI can say, actually, this person, you shouldn't really be seeing that conversation. It's not going to be good for anybody. It can modify the title and the description of the conversation to bring you along. We know from contact theory that even discussing certain types of topics is more or less likely to reduce prejudice. The AI itself should come up with those topics to group us together to have those conversations. Social norms, for example, when an Israeli sees a Palestinian profile, it could highlight that 20% of Palestinians have at least 5 Israeli friends on this platform. It's not all that uncommon, right? Or even within the conversation itself. For example, if one person is dominating the conversation, creating unequal status conditions, the AI can step in and say certain things. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways for us to think about this. Why are we thinking about extending contact theory? Why not just pure, regular, theoretical contact theory? This is an insight that comes from the scientist Richard Sutton. He calls it the bitter lesson. In the long run, he says, the bitter lesson is that building in how we think doesn't work. From the last 70 years of AI research, we've seen that general methods that leverage computation are ultimately going to be the most effective and by a large margin. What exactly does this look like? AI researchers start by building in knowledge into their agents. That's like me going into the outside world, picking up contact theory, and then installing it into the agents. That does help in the short term, certainly when I don't have enough money for computation, right? But it helps in the short term, and it's satisfying to the researcher, but ultimately it's going to plateau. We've seen why it's going to plateau. There's way too many variables to deal with. And ultimately, breakthrough progress is going to arrive by scaling computation through search and learning. That's going to be in the long run. For now, we're still in the short run, and contact theory is immensely helpful. If you want to help us scale contact, you can find me on LinkedIn, and that's my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was really interesting. We're going to turn it over to our next speaker, Ola Mohajer, founder of and CEO of Transcend, who is going to speak. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can speak from here. We're so happy that you were able to make it here.
Me too. Hi, everyone. My name is Ola Mohajer. I'm the CEO and founder of Transcend. Transcend is an AI-first system that helps you, governments, multilaterals, international organizations, and businesses with commercial interests in conflict zones make the most strategic decisions on matters of peace, security, and commercial risk. I don't think I have to tell this group that violent conflict today is at record-breaking highs. A few years ago in 2022, the UN produced a report that demonstrated that the world was experiencing the most violent levels of violent conflict since World War II. Those figures were put together before the second invasion of Ukraine, before what we're seeing in Sudan, and before what we're seeing in Israel, Palestine, and the list can go on and on. So I think you see the point. Things are not going in the right direction. But I will start what I'm going to tell you by highlighting a time when things were somewhat working. When I was a teenager, I was trapped in the 2006 Lebanese-Israeli war in the Becker Valley. I was separated from my mother and taking care of my younger siblings. As a teenager, I knew, felt, believed that the UN was going to come through for us, that they were going to broker a ceasefire. I think about that now and I think, what does a teenager know about the multilateral system? Not much, but somehow I knew that. At that time, the UN did come through for us, and they did broker a ceasefire. There isn't a teenager on the face of the planet, let alone a person today, that believes that the UN or any other entity is going to come through for them. So I have spent the last 15 years of my career working across conflict zones in Africa and the Middle East. I've worked for the United Nations, government, and most recently, the U.S. Institute of Peace. And having that insider perspective, I got to see firsthand why that machine, the mechanisms, the institutions, despite our best efforts, weren't working. One story I can tell you is emblematic of the entire time I spent in this space. There was a project I led for the Department of State looking at a conflict in the Horn of Africa. Policymakers were desperate to understand that conflict and how to bring it to an end. The project took us 2 years, just shy of $3 million in spending, and it took about 50 people. This is across the Atlantic as well, because of course we were engaging civilians, kind of like the work that my colleagues just mentioned, that to bring their voices into the folds of a peace process. The results, when we produced them, they were obsolete as soon as they were published. And that's pretty logical to see why. I like to say in the before times, we would do our analysis. I think you can see my hand. We would do our analysis. And of course, it would end at a point in time, right? But the conflict continues. And so policymakers till today are forced to make really high stakes decisions based on outdated information. AI, as you all have come to know, changes that dramatically. This is seismically shifting the space. And I'm grateful for the people in this room and not in this room who have put together this panel, as well as others like it, to really highlight the positive use cases of AI and just simply how it can change our world for the better. So that brings me to tell you about why I started Transcend, though you can tell from both streams of my stories in my life why it would make sense for someone like me to start an organization that's going to help others make the best decisions on matters of peace, security, and risk. I won't tell you about everything that we're doing. I will just highlight a little bit about what we're doing because we're doing a lot. But I'll highlight the thing that I think is most important and pressing for our time. And somebody, there's a professor, forgive me, Professor Ozerdem, I think mentioned something around this point at the very top of the call, and it's prudent to spend a little time on it. Transcend is developing agentic diplomacy. Agentic diplomacy, and I'll get to Professor Ozerdem's point in a moment on warfare, but you'll see where I'm going now. Agentic diplomacy is a novel AI model that leverages diplomacy, mediation, facilitation, negotiation, cooperation, and participatory methods to deliver strategic solutions in peace, security, and commerce. You might be wondering why commerce, because as diplomats, you focus on the full picture, human rights, commerce, peace, security. Many of you already know this, but commerce is not a piece to be ignored. Here's what it can do. Here's what it does. It illuminates unseen pathways for stabilization and resolution rapidly. It safely tests and interrogates the feasibility of pathways to bring the best solutions to the table in minutes, not 2 years or 3 months or however long it used to take us. And it engages civilians at scale responsibly, always grounded, particularly with Transcend, always grounded in the credible peace and political processes of the time. And then, of course, as you've all come to probably glean, we can do sense making, or in other words, analysis of complex dynamics at a pace and volume unprecedented. So now that time lag between our analysis and our decisions is almost gone. That's tremendously powerful. And I know that as a civilian in conflict and as a mediator on the facilitator, a convener on the other side of that. So Agentic diplomacy is the only technology designed to deliver long-term stabilization and cooperation faster and with greater precision than anything we've ever seen. And this is where I want to go back to something that Professor Ozerdem said. Investments in agentic warfare are growing rapidly as well. If these investments are left unbalanced and unintegrated with agentic diplomacy, leaders risk being trapped in reaction mode and deploying short-sighted strategies in perpetuity, meaning we will constantly be on the back foot. This imbalance fuels higher levels of violence, and in my humble view, I believe that this is why part of the problem of why we are seeing greater force and violence in the world's conflicts today. So today, agentic warfare is outpacing agentic diplomacy. And I'll wrap with this to get a little nerdy since we're in a university setting. You will all appreciate the triple D nexus: defense, diplomacy, development. Those three components are critical for intelligent and strategic foreign policy. Right now, literally, technically speaking, that is primarily focused on defense. And that is why I want everyone here to know that it is a national and international security imperative that we address this gap. So I want to thank everyone here today. I want to thank the organizers for putting this important panel together. I'm grateful to be here, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Ola. That was amazing. We've already heard from 3 great speakers, and we have one last speaker to share with you. Sarah Jean Benjamin, founder and CEO of PeaceIQ. I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Jean Benjamin, and I am a founder of PeaceIQ. It is our mission to work with each of you to collectively raise the peace intelligence of this planet. I don't think that I really need to explain why that is so imperative for us to do right now. I believe each of us are personally living through great resilience, through a massive amount of global and personal conflict in each of our lives that impact us in different ways. But since we are here to learn how data and technology can help you to further your work as conflict resolutionists, as future peace builders, as future peace agents in the world, I want to take a look at the numbers and the statistics of why this wicked challenge is so important for us to solve. Taking a look in our own backyard in the US, we are actually ranked 131 out of 163 countries on the Global Peace Index. I don't know if any of you guys are surprised by that. I was a little surprised, but that we were ranked so low, because if you think about all of the resources and all of the access to information, technology, data that we have, the infrastructure that we have, we have the capacity, I believe, to really unlock peace intelligence within our country. Now, this Peace Index is developed based on different data indicators. How do we measure how peaceful a country is? Well, some of the indicators that the Global Peace Index looks at is how secure, how safe that society is, how many ongoing conflicts are happening domestically and internationally, and the militarization of that country, as well as 23 additional indicators, overall indicators. If we take a deeper dive on some of the ongoing conflicts that happen in our everyday lives. If we look at the workforce loses annually every single year $360 billion to unresolved conflict. That is due to a loss of productivity, employee turnover, and billions in litigation. So that means despite all of the lawyers, managers, and systems and resources that we have in the workforce, there is still something broken in our conflict resolution methodologies and ecosystems. If we look at our school systems, we've had over 53 incidents of gun violence this year alone in schools. We're approaching over 1 million incidents of violence across the nation in public schools. And over 67% of our schools report that they experience violence and conflict. So how do we tackle such a wicked challenge? Well, I can tell you a little bit about the challenges that I've experienced in my own personal life, and the way that I've approached it, and why developing peace intelligence in our systems, I believe, is part of the solution. I was born as a refugee of the Liberian Civil War, and I am also a Baha'i refugee from Iran. My culture was one of wisdom traditions that focused a lot on developing empathy and an intelligence for how to respond to different people that are experiencing the impacts of violence. And that is something that equipped me as a human rights attorney to work with different populations and different communities, not just as a peace builder, but also in someone who was deeply calling for justice. Because oftentimes we think that peace is the absence of conflict when it is really the presence of justice. And in working with those communities, I drew upon earlier experiences within my childhood where, you know, in my culture, you don't necessarily just learn in a linear fashion. Everyone is your teacher. Everyone is a piece of the piece. Because I was able to hold that presence in those spaces, it was amazing to see them develop, the youth that we were working with, develop their own capacity for peace building, to think about the wicked challenges ahead of them, and take ownership of those challenges, not necessarily looking to just leaders. In essence, they were developing a peace education. I also, along the way, met other educators, such as Mark and Margarita at the Peace Innovation Institute at Stanford, who have championed and who have pioneered a lot of the work in the peace engineering space, putting together a consortium of different peace engineering universities. And in working with them, I began to think about how do we take the information that we learn from the people that we work with and develop an intelligence and develop an education for peace that we can all adapt to and begin to look through a lens, because we do not need to just solve conflicts. We actually need to see ourselves as creators, as engineers of our future. And, you know, if you think about it, like whether you use social media and you are a content creator, or you are an engineering student and one day you will build, the buildings that we sit in today, we all need to adapt a lens of thinking about how we can take data and use that data to develop a more peaceful world. At PeaceIQ, we want to make a peace education accessible to not just amazing universities like your own and amazing programs such as your own, but how do we make this accessible to students? I don't know why peace education is not part of our everyday curriculum with such a wicked challenge that we have ahead of us. But also in looking at strong institutions like the workplace, and developing trainings in which a peace education is not just beneficial for the community within that workspace, but also to the work environments that benefit from the increased peace within their space, the increased productivity and creativity and innovation that takes place. So we are developing an immersive game, an immersive simulation that makes this peace education accessible. And this training is not just developed by me alone, but it is co-developed by the youth that we work with. Some of the modules that we've developed so far are in thinking through what is the value proposition of peace? How does peace drive innovation, sustainability, and business success? How can fairness and equity build trust, collaboration, and positive work environments? We are essentially teaching the art of not just resolving conflicts, but how to transform conflict. Because when we think about conflict today, we're not just talking about simple conflicts of, so-and-so is stepping on my toes at work, and it's more complex than that. We're discussing real societal issues at work, in our schools, in different environments, and we need the tools to be able to resolve those wicked challenges ahead of us. And so I invite you to follow us at PeaceIQ and to join us and other students that are co-developing these modules with us on Peace Space. And I believe together that we can collectively define and develop peace intelligence and make a peace education accessible to everyone on this planet. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. That was really powerful. We have a few minutes for questions. I don't know if you've been able to see any of the chat. Please feel free to drop your question in the chat if you haven't. Let's give it a second here.
Shawn.
I also had a question here, more specifically to the speaker online.
Sure, go ahead.
Very interested in serious games, interactive media, which is part of that. And you mentioned a simulation, a game. How do you measure both the states that the players, the people who are interacting with the game, before they play the game and after they play the game, to determine what has changed? And from that, determine how successful you're being, and learn from that how to be more successful.
Yes, absolutely. I wish I could share my screen. There were some slides I would have loved to share with you, but yeah, so we are actually developing not just the training simulations, but as you mentioned, insights that can go along with that information so that you can use that data not just within the simulation, but also in the real world. Games are a phenomenal way to measure how well you can handle and respond to real world challenges, because you can actually take things that reference, not exactly, but reference cultural context and put those within a simulation and see how you would react or change your reaction to it. I will say that before answering that question of how are we measuring players' ability, I would say that we also use AI in the development of our game. But I also work in AI governance, and it is very imperative, I think, in the world of peace building and technology and the way we think about measuring peace, that we're doing that from an ethical lens. And so we're taking a lot of time to develop that ethical layer of our product prior to just going out there and collecting people's data of their abilities or what they want to improve on. When it comes to measuring, your peace IQ or your peace intelligence, we don't want to think about it in such a linear way in the way that we typically think about the way we measure intelligence. We're challenging the way we think about peace, but we also want to challenge the way we think about intelligence. It's not just about how much information do you know, right? And I think in many contexts, we're measured very linearly in that way. But instead, we're thinking through self-assessments in which you could provide that information and have a measured score across different metrics so that you can understand better, how you fall or how you can improve like the progress or across each of those metrics. And that is how we approach the measurement of peace in general, through thinking through, for example, thinking through a metric of, like, for example, how well you could engage with someone across what we call a difference boundary. A difference boundary would be, for example, people mentioned earlier, someone from Israel and someone from Palestine. Well, if you're playing a game with someone, if two people from each side are playing a game with one another and they are creating positive interactions with one another, well, we can actually look at and measure those positive interactions and how well they're forming and developing a relationship, right? So those are some metrics that we can think about when we think about how we are developing peace. So those are layers that we are building aside from building the game. We are building those layers, and we treat the data and the measurement of those things very collaboratively with many other thought leaders in this space and other people that we've worked with in this space to really define what that means.
Thanks so much. It's so fascinating to learn about PeaceIQ, along with, we have cultural intelligence, we have emotional intelligence, and now we can have peace intelligence. We have a couple questions in the chat. We have reached the end of the formal time, but we're going to keep going just maybe a few more minutes. Two questions that kind of go together for our tech startup founders is, what kind of investments are usually required to develop this type of technology? How can academic institutions and even others outside, we have, other than direct funding, how can peace tech investors support you? So, what kind of support are you looking for beyond direct funding in terms of partnerships across different individuals or groups? Does someone want to start?
Sure.
Shawn?
So I guess other than direct funding and all that, one of the like just getting connected into networks of people, it's a very small group of people who are able to step into a startup and be like, okay, I'm gonna work for no salary or little salary, for equity, passion, drive. Adam and I were talking on the way here, like the amount of times that we've changed what our startups have done, like is almost weekly, monthly, like it's a hard experience. And so getting connected into people who are looking for similar things is a big help. And then also, we're all peace tech. The four of us, we have peace tech startups that are for-profit companies. We're not nonprofit. We're not looking for grants. We're not looking for donations. We're looking for clients that can pay us the price of what our companies and our products and services are worth, so that we can then internally go fund our peace work, you know, and like there's a lot of overlap in between those two fields, but you know, so also like help getting clients that are not necessarily peace related that fit into our business models. And then the other side of that is NGOs, nonprofits, they're all tech adverse. They're all scared of it. Like, you know, our private programming for Didi in Israel and Palestine, working with pro-peace NGOs, they do not know how to interact with us. And it's almost like in the next 20 years, what's needed is an intermediary group of intermediary type of organization that knows tech, that knows NGOs, and is able to help them like grab these solutions and incorporate them and so on. So that's also another thing, like, you know, figuring out how to help NGOs jump out. Other.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think exactly what Shawn mentioned. He spoke about getting clients. What do we mean by this? Who pays? What is that? None of that is trivial, right? So even help in taxonomizing who gets to pay for what. A lot of people are coming into this from lots of different, you know, walks of life. We haven't necessarily grown up in the peace building world. To understand whether we are selling peace, or maybe peace is a side effect of something else that we're selling, and who would pay for those more direct things, so that we can go and fundraise, or we can actually just generate our own cash flow. Somebody asked how much it costs, you know, how much would you like to fundraise? I mean, to get a couple of engineers and a couple of designers and a salesperson, you're already at $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Like, what do you know, like?
Minimum.
Yeah, and then like that's, if you need an office or you have WeWork or Zoom or whatever. Like these are costs, and as Shawn mentioned, that's before you find product market fit. Now you have to iterate to actually discover who that person is that's actually going to pay for it. So I think it's in the millions to actually do this right, and which means you need to have a good story for how you're going to monetize, which means you have to have a really good understanding of the clients or customers. So even helping us understand who those customers are would be extremely important.
Oh, you want to? I thought that was really well put by both of you. I would only add, just to address some of the hesitation that there is, or lack of understanding that there is, not just around AI, because that could probably require a whole panel in and of itself, but around profits from peace. For those who might be thinking, you know, something like, how can you profit from peace? Or is it ethical to profit from peace? I would ask you that same question back to you in why not? Why not? We talked briefly about agentic warfare. There is certainly profit generation happening in defense spaces. Why isn't there a peace development industrial complex? I mean, I'm not a capitalist, but I just, like, let's ask ourselves these questions. I haven't explored them fully myself, but we're all students here. Let's ask why. The other piece that my colleagues touched on that I think is important to highlight, just at the underpinnings, like go back to your Econ 101 class. If no one is willing to pay for what you deliver in terms of a product, and putting that in the face of governments around the world deciding they're unwilling to grant towards this, there is a problem. And so they touched on this a little bit, in that we have to demonstrate, and that's the hard part of all of this. We have to demonstrate a revenue model for products that deliver peace and stabilization. You could probably do a course in this alone. Happy to come and lecture on it. So this is all to say, back to your Econ 101. The cost of something is what you're willing to pay for it. If no one is willing to pay, then all three of us, four, should close down our doors, and no one should be developing peace tech. If you think that's an alternative world that you want to be in, happy to explore that with you, only in a VR type of format. But that is a world that genuinely scares me a little bit. So I think we need to question our fundamental assumptions, particularly those of us who have had the privilege of spending so much time in these normative, beautiful, beautiful normative spaces, theoretical ivory towers, really. But let's bring it down to reality. Where are we really? How do we ground this? And how do we make the best possible use of these tools that can be used in many different ways for good? I'll leave you with this for those who I might still need to convince, because now I'm starting to convince you, I realize. This is a very reductive example and doesn't cover everything, but I think it's worth sharing to start getting the questions answered in ourselves that I've posed to you. If we look at any tool that we have in our lives, take a tool that you probably use day to day, a fork, chopsticks, right? We know generally what they're used for. If I ask you, what do you use this for? You'd say probably to eat, most likely. Unless you're Ariel, then you're using it to comb your hair. But this lends to the example. You can use a tool in many different ways. This tool in particular, if we're talking AI technology, which is what I'm referring to, this tool has many different use cases. So let's go back to the fork. You can use it to feed yourself. I can use it to feed Shawn. I can use it to feed this room. I can also use it as a weapon. I can use it to take your eye out or stab you in the jugular, just to make it very, very vivid about, right? And so now the same kind of logic applies in a little more, in a much more complex system and tool to AI. So while there is very good and important work, which I believe Sarah touched on the ethics of how we use AI, that is necessary. But it does not mean that we shy away from it entirely, because this technology has already demonstrated that it has the power to completely change our health impacts for the better, curing cancer and other serious diseases, affecting our education systems, affecting governance. And what this group of people here is trying to do is to use it for peace. So I'd say partner with Shawn. Partner with Adam, partner with Sarah, because when our own communities turn away from us because they're afraid of that which they don't understand, it makes it harder for us to do the important work and use this tool for good.
Wow, that was excellent. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you so much for your pitch. I think it was very strong. We're gonna close the session right now. Go ahead, Abby, if you wanna. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our hosts, the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. We invite you all to check out both the school, their programs, their events, and then also to check out UNA-NCA. We have a great event coming up for the United Nations 80th anniversary. It's a gala at the Embassy of France. It is going to be a great event on October 25th. So it's coming up in a month. And I invite you all to check that out. I hope you're able to connect with our speakers on LinkedIn or in other manners so we can keep these conversations going. And I, again, just want to do an extra thank you to Abby for helping coordinate this event, and George Mason University for pushing the boundaries of what peace education is and conflict resolution studies are. Because yes, we have to keep growing and learning and innovating. And yes, we want to understand the traditional theories, but we're living in a new world, so we have to be able to meet that moment. With that, I would say thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend.